Welcome to FluteTube. Pull up a chair and join me today. For this video, you'll want to be sitting down because today I have a very, very sad story to tell you. It's about etudes. It is a very sad story, so prepare yourself. When I was growing up, I did some etude books that really challenged me. The biggest challenge is that I had a teacher who, when I was 10 years old, put me in the Altez book of etudes, and that was extremely challenging for me, but I wanted the challenge, and I learned a lot in that book about learning music, how to learn difficult music accurately and quickly. It was really great for me. But when I was in high school, I had a teacher who, with great reasons, great intentions, said to me, there are a lot of etude books that you skipped along the way. Let's go back, you can see those. It will be good for you to be familiar with these books, and it will be good for your teaching in the future to be very aware of what's in all of these etude books. There were many important etude books out there that I had never seen. For instance, several Anderson etude books, Kohler books, Garibaldi, Tershak, Danjan, all kinds of etudes that I had kind of skipped along the way. That was all really by way of introduction, and now we're to the point where my sad story truly begins, because the problem with these etudes was simply that I could learn them very quickly. By the time I was in high school, I'd done much more difficult etudes, and these were not giving me enough of a challenge. And as you would expect, my life in high school was very busy, so it wasn't a top priority for me to spend a lot of time on etude practice every week. So instead of practicing these etudes all week long, as of course I really should have done, I fell into a bit of a routine, and this is what it was. This is a confession. Perhaps it will absolve something deep in my soul. What I would do with my etudes is I would wait and look at them on the day of my lesson. I had a little bit of a window of time between when school ended and when it was time to drive to my lesson, and I would practice my etude really hard during that one window of time each week. I would maybe practice a half hour, and I remember concentrating so hard and optimizing that time as best I could, maybe just finding the very most difficult spot in the etude and really working on 3 or 4 lines, going through the whole etude a handful of times, and that's all I would do before my lesson. Then I would go to my lesson and I would play the etude, and I would be concentrating so hard because it was still brand new. I was nearly sight reading still. I remember I had contact lenses and they would get really dry because I wouldn't blink. I'd be staring so hard, trying to look ahead, trying to do all the little tricks in my book to get through these etudes accurately, even though I hadn't practiced them for more than about a half hour before my lesson. And then what would happen is I had the most amazing, positive, great, supportive teacher that she would say, "That was wonderful, brava," and she'd give me a big check mark. Now you see, right? Now you see why this is such a sad story. It's because growing up as a young flutist, even as an adult flutist, but especially as a young, new, impressionable flutist, I should have been practicing etudes every day, and I was only doing it usually 1 day a week. That still did me some good, but not nearly as much good as it could have done if I actually was practicing etudes every day. If you go back to my very first FluteTube episode 1, Practice, 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 in that episode, one thing I talk about is James Galway's practice routine. James Galway is one of the most renowned flute players ever to live, and his self-described practice routine, I will recap very quickly. He would practice tone studies and scales, things like that, for about an hour. Then he would practice etudes for an hour. And then he would practice repertoire for 2 more hours. So that's 4 hours of practice. Then he would eat lunch. Then he would do the whole thing again. And that's how he stayed at the top of his game and had this successful performance career. Well, maybe we can't all practice etudes 2 hours a day, but the percentage of time that he put into each of his areas of practice is a really important thing to consider, as well as the fact that he did so much practice. He practiced 25% tone and scales, 25% etudes, 50% repertoire. So if you are practicing 2 hours a day, you should practice about a half hour on etudes. And I clearly was not doing that because in high school, I was doing all kinds of auditions and competitions and recitals. I had plenty of time in my schedule for etudes, but I did not bake that etude practice time into my routine. Really, I should have confessed to my teacher that I was not practicing these etudes enough. If she had asked me, how long are you practicing your etudes? I would have told her the truth. I would have told her that I was just looking at them the day of the lesson. And if she had known that, she could have assigned me 2 or 3 etudes a week instead. She could have given me harder etudes. She could have given me goals on the metronome to get them fast so they would be really challenging. Even though they were easier etudes, I'm sure I would have had to work to get them up to speed. I don't want to put all the blame on my teacher. I could have told her. I could have said that I wanted more of a challenge. And as a teacher, this reminds me that I need to ask my students how long they practice their studies, because we so often take for granted that our students are working. If we hear any progress, and they won't make progress without working, but they could be working harder. Etudes are really wonderful tools for students to learn. They help students learn difficult music more quickly. They do greatly improve our ability to sight read because we go through them more quickly than solos that we refine and we get perfect before we move on. Etudes, we move on after a week or 2. We should, so that we see more and more of them and our skills get better and better at learning music and sight reading. But we should not be sight reading our etudes in our lessons. Or even just being way too close to sight reading. If you are a flute student, think of James Galway's percentage of practice time. Are you really using a quarter of your time to practice etudes? Are you using a quarter of your time to practice scales and tone studies and other studies that will really improve your playing? If you are a flute teacher, do what I have to do and remind yourself to ask your students, how long are they practicing etudes? Are their etudes challenging enough? Perhaps they're too challenging. If the etudes are overwhelming, intimidating to your students, they may not want to practice them. Every student's personality is a little different, but we gotta find that sweet spot where they want to practice and are willing to put in the time to practice their etudes so that they won't have a sad story like mine one day in the future.